Welcome to another episode of Movie Night. Our special guest is Ahd Kamel, whose film Sanctity is the subject of our talk today. A native of Saudi Arabia, she is a filmmaker and actress based in New York City, or based in London right now, I guess, and has worked in many films across the region. We are excited to have you join us. You've been part of another afikra episode, but this is the first time that you're on Movie Night, so welcome, Ahd.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's start by talking about how you got started in film and what it's like at this moment in sort of the film landscape and how you sort of see yourself and all that. But let's start biographically. When did you start considering yourself a filmmaker, and when did you want to go into films?
It all happened by accident. Nothing was planned. I was in my senior year at Parsons School of Design in New York. I was studying animation, and I hated animation, and I didn't want to submit an animated thesis. So that was my first kind of encounter with the camera. But then I applied to film school with the intention to prolong my stay in the U.S., not knowing if that would actually work for me or not. And I started film school, and I was working for 15, 16 hours and not complaining, which was
that's
a change for me. Yeah. So I was like, this is what I want to do. So I kind of started there. And then it took a while for me to actually say I'm a filmmaker because I grew up in Saudi, and that wasn't even part of the conversation at all.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even an option. So for me, I kind of came to it, and a lot of people back home were like, this is a hobby, it's a phase, it's this, whatever it is. So it took a while until I did a short film that I acted in, and then it got nominated and I won a prize, and I was like, okay, this is actually real and it's happening, you know?
Yeah.
So that was in like 2004 or 5, I would say.
When you were doing animation, it's interesting that you studied animation. Do you feel like you still think like an animator, even if you hated it?
For storytelling perspective, yeah, definitely. I think that's what drew me to animation. But the technical side,
I'm curious how that actually informs your work, though, because like whatever drew you to animation, this idea of storytelling. I'll say something that somebody said to me once, and I'll adjust it. Not everyone wants to be an animator. That is a very specific thing to be drawn towards. So do you remember the few things that like misled you down that path? What were they? It was like Pixar movies, or?
No, I was much younger. So I was in love with Disney animations, and we're talking about old, drawing animation, drawn by hand, frame by frame kind of thing. So, and I loved the storytelling, but like also Sleeping Beauty, I think behind it all, I think behind all of it was like, I didn't know film was even an option. I just knew I wanted to tell stories. And I was in art school, so that was the place to kind of be, because I flip-flopped. I went from animation, and then I did communication design, but then they had an animation track, which was like, okay, I get to write a story here. And not only that, I can hide behind these characters that I built.
Yeah.
So that was...
it's really interesting. Okay, so you're in New York. You decide to start. You write and star in like a short. That's your first thing.
No, so I was in film school, and while I was in film school, I had a chance to direct, to produce, and to fulfill different roles, basically to learn. But I did a short film called Broadening with an NYU graduate. And I was acting in the film. I initially went in to translate the script. I had no intention of acting because, again, acting was just like, that's not even an option. But then when I was in film school, I started acting in my friends' films because no one was going to see them. And this was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And it's funny because my first role was a suicide bomber, which is crazy. It was one of those situations where it was like, okay, if we're going to write the story, it has to come from a very authentic place, and not just a label kind of thing. And the director was obviously in agreement. So that's how
That's interesting. So you never studied acting. You just sort of?
I did after that.
Oh, you did after that, because in Sanctity you play Arij, the main character, and you're fantastic and you're amazing in
Thank you so much
in this performance. Okay, so this is Movie Night. The structure of our Movie Night podcast is essentially we encourage everyone to go watch the film. If you happen to be in the Middle East, you can watch it on Netflix. I'm sure you can figure out where to watch it if you're not in the Middle East. But I want to play a trailer to the film. The runtime is about 32 minutes, I think. So we'll play a short trailer, and then we are going to talk about it.
The film is actually also on Vimeo, my channel. So if you go to Vimeo and type Ahd Kamel, it's all over the world.
Okay, amazing. So you can see it there too. All right, let's watch it on Netflix.
الله أجلك يا بنتي أنا ما سمعنا إلا دحين الله يخليك
الله يخليك تسلم يا خالد شكرا الحمد لله سامحيني الله يعينك بساعدك الحمد لله بنتي السلام حبيبتي.
So if you were to explain the plot, or maybe not the plot, but if you were to tell like a 15-year-old cousin what this movie's about, what would you say?
It's about a woman pregnant with her first child, widowed, and she's basically trying to protect her unborn child. Pretty much she'll do whatever it takes. So the film is about feminine strength, endurance, but also what is really sanctuous, where's the sanctity of life kind of thing. Because there's a pun, the name Hurma in Arabic is anything that has a sanctity. But in Saudi Arabia, a woman is called a Hurma. And there's like obviously also, sanctuary, exactly. And then she has its own sanctity. A home has its own sanctity, orphans. And so there are like specific people who are awarded this sanctity. But to me, it just feels like it's just a name, but it's not really respected.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of different, there's a secondary component to the film. So the widowed Arij, the widowed main character, is immediately in the first scene or second scene, I guess, is confronted with a man who immediately invades that sanctity, right? Who says, "Hey, you owe me money. I have no receipts. You owe me money because your deceased husband owed me money, and I might even take your house." Right?
Yeah. And I have to remind you that this was made in 2012. So Saudi has changed dramatically since then. But back then it was like the height of the moment, where things were, a woman could not do anything. And it was honestly born out of my own frustration because I had to rely on my brothers to do everything. And I'm very lucky that my brothers are decent human beings who will help me out, but that's not the case. And I heard so many stories of women who are basically trapped in these situations and they can't get out of it because of this very, crazy rule that a woman wasn't responsible for herself. Yeah.
There's also this other thing that I feel like you play with, which is like, that the sort of antagonist character of the entire film is like, you need to pay me right now. I might even take your entire house. Like, I don't care if you don't know about this. I'm gonna, the sort of also the sanctity of these of agreements don't matter. And then she's like, but I'm in mourning. I'm not allowed to see men. And he's like, oh, I guess I can respect that. Like, he'll respect that. That's all the other stuff you won't respect.
Yeah, the irony of it is just crazy. And I mean, growing up in that was so conflicting.
Yeah, for sure. I want to talk about, so let's get into when and how you filmed all this stuff and where did the idea come from. So maybe let's start with, where did the idea come from?
So the idea was basically that question: what would a woman do without a man in her life? And as I told you, like I lost my father when I was a teenager. So technically my brothers are my guardians. And I lived in New York, but when I came back, I was divorced in my 30s and I still had to rely on my brothers. And like I said, I was very lucky in many ways. You know, my frustrations were nothing compared to other people. So that's kind of how the film was born. What would a woman do? You know, It starts with a question. And I usually like to ask the question and then sort of deal with it in the film, but also leave room for the audience to kind of make up their own feelings about what's happening. So it's kind of just peering into someone's life and leaving room for the audience. And there might not be an answer, but I think it's important to ask the question.
Can I ask you some of the process of writing it? I mean, because it's an important question, and the pacing of the film is such that it actually allows the audience to kind of have space to think through this quagmire. Like, what would I do? Like, oh yeah, there's that. Oh yeah, the neighbors are so annoying. Who's gonna take the trash out? Like, all these things. The pacing is like slow enough such that I can actually think through the minutia of life. So let me ask you a question. How many times how many versions of the script came across? Like, when did you think, okay, yeah, this is actually perfect. This is the right length. This is the right everything.
I mean, it was definitely a process. It started off with something completely, I knew the premise in the beginning, but the question for me and what I kept going back and forth with was, how does she choose to deal with it? You know, because the first and obvious choice would be prostitution, but I didn't want to go down that road. You know, it's such a repeated kind of story. How do I tell it in a different way? And it's funny, as I was writing, I was also watching Weeds. I don't know if you know the show. Yeah. So that kind of was just like, boom, boom, you know, housewife selling drugs at home, you know? So it's something that could definitely happen, and especially in a situation like this. So that's kind of how it came together. But then also the film as well evolved when I casted the actors to play and brought them in as well. Because even the brother-in-law, who basically comes and asks her for the money, I wanted to portray him as a three-dimensional person. You know, in a way, he might be evil, but he's also sick in a way. So there's something that's there. So the wound is not just on one side; the wound is actually on both sides.
Yeah. Where did the idea of Ali come from? And I think that's the boy's name, right? I remember. Right. So Ali, and where did his three-dimensionality come from? Like, because he could very much be a one-note character, right? He could very much been this sort of like Artful Dodger type character who just comes in, is like really sharp and has funny lines and stuff like that, but he's not. And so was there a model in your head for, I think I know this kid?
Sort of, but I think I also worked with the actor Muhammad who played Ali, and he's Yemeni. But he's never been to Yemen. You know, he's born and raised in Saudi legally and everything. But he brought another perspective for me to things, and the sweetness in him. There's a sweetness that when he first came in, but not only that, like he was the first one out of the kids that I saw who asked me questions about the character. So I felt like he knows what this character is. And we went back and forth as well, because this was his first time. And the other thing we spoke about was about his puberty and certain feelings and things and how we would deal with that on set. So I think between us, we found safety and we wanted to tell the story. And I think, like the woman in the film, there's a large group of people who are labeled, majahil or unknown, who have been living in Saudi for years and years and generations, but they're completely not recognized by the system. And they live in the margins as well. So it's kind of also giving a voice to that not everyone who is illegal is, they're human. And especially these kids, who were born into this, they had no choice. Yeah.
That brings me to something I wanted to ask you about, which was the dedication. Do you remember what the dedication was?
Yes, إلى جدة جدتنا كلنا.
Exactly. And it's funny, for somebody who's never been to Jeddah, why is this clearly a love letter to Jeddah, but also sort of like a heartbreak?
Yeah.
Why?
It's my hometown. I love it and I hate it at the same time. I have such a dysfunctional relationship with the city, but at the same time, it has something and a spirit, and that spirit is there's an urban myth that Eve is buried in Jeddah, hence the name Wadjda, which means grandmother. So it was kind of a dedication to the grandmother, like the mothers of this world who are neglected and who can endure all this.
Yeah. The fatherless, motherless grandmothers.
Yeah.
It's how would you describe sort of like the heart and soul of Jeddah?
I've never seen it anywhere else, to be honest. And my relationships with the people there are just so unique because I'm obviously from there. So I have a very biased opinion.
Yeah.
But I do believe there's a sense of kindness and hospitality of the people that I've never experienced anywhere else. I mean, shooting in that neighborhood, it was one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city.
Yeah.
I've never visited El Hindawiya. And I've never visited that part of that neighborhood. Like there's like some stores on the main road, but it was the first time I went in, and it was such a humbling experience because I've come in with these preconceived notions about how they're going to deal with us. And they completely blew my mind away. They surprised me with how welcoming they were, how kind they were, how generous they were. And they are dirt poor. Like I'm talking about families that live in one room, a family of 9, but they still want to, make you tea and be there and help you out. And the week I spent there changed me so much on so many levels. So, going back to Jeddah, it was just one of those moments where I fell in love with the city. And at the same time, I had a big conflict because I used to shoot this part of town and then drive across the city to the other side of town where big houses and fences and everything is. So it's kind of, how do you reconcile the two? And I feel the spirit of Jeddah does that in a way.
Yeah. And it does. It's like also an ethical question about how can you responsibly tell these stories in a way that's not tokenizing, in a way that doesn't just extract value. What was their response like when the film came out at the time?
It was amazing. We got
in Jeddah.
It's funny. The other thing about the film was, you said the pacing, because when we were editing, I was like, everyone was like, you need to stop at 30 minutes. And I was like, I need those extra 7 minutes. I don't care where the film ends up. I can't put out something just because. And funny enough, we got invited by Berlin. They saw the film in Qatar, and Berlin wouldn't take their short competition. One of their requirements is that the film doesn't exceed 30 minutes. But they took the film and they showed it. So I was really happy. It was definitely one of those moments where it was because it was really tough also shooting in Saudi. At the time, there was no filming. We did the whole thing guerrilla style. So for everything to come together and for people to receive it so well. And even when it's screened in Saudi, it's screened privately for many different groups of audiences. And for the most part, a lot of people were moved by the film. Yeah. I mean, obviously you have some people who have to find something to criticize, but nothing that was, or at least nothing to my face. They could be talking behind me for sure, but nothing to my face. And I was really happy. I mean, it was amazing to screen it to, 2,000 people in an auditorium in Berlin.
Yeah. What about sort of members of the community that you filmed in? I mean, like when you screen it for some of the actors and some of the families of the actors, how did that go?
Really well. They really liked it because in the middle of doing all this, they had no idea what was going to come out. So I was really happy with their reaction. We weren't able to do so many screenings in the neighborhood just because at the time there were so many restrictions and issues. But the number of people we could actually, we brought a few people in, like who worked on the film, and the guy who rented us his house and stuff to show them the film. So the people who were involved in the film got to see the film, and they were very proud. They were very proud. They're like, "You're giving us a voice." Yeah.
It's funny because like the way the film ends, without any spoilers, it's quite literally a new opening, right? And I so desperately wanted to be like, I was like, please let her tell me in this interview that she's working on a feature based off a similar plot, and that you're gonna break my heart.
I'm sorry to tell you not, but all I can tell you is I didn't have enough money to finish the film. Okay,
so but in your mind's eye, like with unlimited budgets, there is like a longer story in your head.
100%. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I felt. Because I was like, I feel like I'm only getting started. This is the first act. I feel like this is the first act of a 3-act story.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with a death and it ends with a birth. So
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what you're working on now, and also like what happened in the years afterwards. It's been 10 years since then. So maybe before we move on to what you're working on now, like what happened in the years afterwards, in terms of sort of reception, and as Saudi opened up, did you start thinking like, there are other opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, it was like I said, I had no idea any of this would happen, so it was so well received. I started, preparing for whatever was the next project, and at the same time, Wadjda was filmed a month after this, and it came out the same year. So there was kind of a bit of movement in the beginning. And then I did Jinn, A to B, Zinzana, sort of in that. And in the middle was trying to wait, like basically waiting to figure out a formula that would work to make a feature film in Saudi Arabia, because there was nothing happening. Unfortunately, I left before all the changes. I came to London in 2016. My acting agent is here. And my dream was always to appear in, global screens, not just, honestly, it wasn't part of my dream because it wasn't even there when I started doing all of this. So I came to London and was really focusing on the acting. I did Collateral, which is on Netflix. And then I did another show called Honor and All the Old Knives. So things started to pick up. And I could also now, with everything that happened in Saudi, actually make a proper feature film that I've been wanting to do for many, many, many years. So that's what I've been focusing on recently.
From afar, these days, are you? Do you feel like that the state of film in the region is the same as it was before, or just a little? It's like a new. Just a new day, or do you feel like there has actually been some serious paradigm shift that's like progressive and positive when it comes 100%. To the types of stories that are being asked and told?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're speaking about the region, because all of a sudden too, the region has become a region. Sort of, we're speaking together. Like, I meet filmmakers from all over the Arab world, and that's actually my tribe. And we all started out. Some of us started, some of them started obviously before us. people after us and the people with me. And now I'm seeing all their films being made, which is amazing. And the quality of films, Saudi still is in its infancy. I think it needs a little bit more time for the film industry to produce a well-developed, story and cinematic experience, I would say.
Yeah.
They're doing a lot of other stuff, which is fine. I'm not against it. But if you're talking about cinema, and cinema as a culture. But the rest of the Arab world, I feel, is going through, I wouldn't say a golden age, but some kind of renaissance. The films from Palestine and Jordan and Lebanon and have been quite amazing. They're really, really, and the acting and everything, is global standard. So, and I feel like with all of us coming together, and what's beautiful is our language is obviously different places, but I think, I feel there's definitely a shift, and Saudi coming into a game is a big, big game changer.
Yeah. When you think about, like on a global level, and you're a fun person to talk to about this because you have a foot in both and you understand both. Like most of the most interesting stories being told in Europe and in the States are happening on TV, right? Like prestige TV.
Yeah.
In a sort of a streaming environment. Do you feel like that's what's coming around the bend in the Arab world as well, where a lot of really compelling filmmakers are going to be adapting their stories to not necessarily be features, but to be series?
I think they're already doing that, because I think the trend is all over. And from a practical point of view, it makes more sense for a director to work on a show and make money. And, you just have a steady income and you know what you're doing, as opposed to, but I don't know, there's something about going to a cinema. I'm old school. I'm in my 40s now. So I love, one of my favorite things to do is to go to the cinema and just sit and watch a good movie. It's such a treat for me. Now, I don't know. I don't think that that's a common thing anymore, especially with the pandemic. But still, like, I think you need to be able to have a bit of both. It's not also about following a trend. It doesn't matter if the story is a film or a series. If the story is good, the story is good.
In like 10 years, people are going to be saying, I'm old school. I like watching it on the good old school TV. I don't watch it on my phone. I'm old school. I watch it on my TV.
You have no idea how many times I hear my mom and my dad in me right now. Like, back in our day, we used to. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And my son now just screams anything into his Apple TV remote and it disappears. It's just,
Yeah. Okay. I want to, since we're talking about old school stuff, let's talk about some of the films that you grew up loving. And then we will go to the quick Q&A and then take some questions from the audience. So, the film that we asked you all these questions beforehand to send over your films of note. So the first one was the film that you really loved as a kid. What was this film?
The Dark Crystal.
So I actually don't know anything about it.
Oh my God, you got to go watch it. It was made in the 80s, Jim Henson, and just, I love fantasy stuff. And this was just one of those. And it was all stop animation. There was all these kind of moving, and it was a great story. They actually made it into a Netflix series, but they only did one season, unfortunately.
What is the premise what's the premise of this?
It's basically, in a world, there's good and evil, and the fight, the forces of good and evil, basically. And all these creatures who are the wise ones, as you get, I don't know, on the poster, you can see there's so many different creatures, and
I love it.
Each race has its own kind of thing.
Okay, cool. So then the next question is the film that always makes you laugh. This is, I was so happy that you sent this over. So for the podcast listeners, tell us what this is.
Oh, Spaceballs. Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking to the listeners. Spaceballs, Mel Brooks. You got to watch it. This is a parody of Spaceballs. Spaceballs.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
And just every line, everything. I don't know. Every time I watch it, I crack up.
It's funny. I haven't seen it probably for like 15 years. And then when you sent this over, I was like, oh my God, I have to watch Spaceballs again. I forgot it. This movie and Airplane are like the two like quintessential spoofs. And yeah, so
and for my generation, it was a defining, one of those films that just stuck.
Yeah. Do you remember where you watched this for the first time? Was it on VHS or was it at a theater?
No, it was on VHS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's keep on going. So the film that you can rewatch all the time.
Cinema Paradiso, by Giuseppe Tornatore. I mean, it's just one of my favorite films. It gives you, like, every time I watch it, I feel like my heart has been massaged. Like I cry, I laugh, I have, like, I go through the whole wheel of emotions, and I just love this love story between non-romantic love story. It's just this story of a child and their mentor. And I was very lucky to meet Giuseppe this year at the Red Sea Film Festival. He was on the jury with me.
Yeah.
So it was one of those moments where it was like, you're meeting your idol.
So if you think about who you were when you first started studying film and who you are now, is your relationship to film essentially the same, or did you actually feel like you went through a transformational experience studying at NYU? And so the first few years, like, would the 12-year-old you be surprised? Like, what are you doing? We didn't care about movies this much when we were a kid. Would they be surprised at what you're doing with your life?
Definitely. I mean, I'm surprised. So,
really?
but I grew up in Saudi, right? I grew up in a very sheltered family. Like, they were open-minded and we traveled, but I never thought that this would where I'd end up. It was never one of those things that was premeditated.
What did you think you would be doing?
I don't know. I mean, I loved storytelling. I just never knew what format it would come out in. I knew I wanted to tell stories. But initially, even when I first started and I went to New York, I was going as a lawyer because I can argue anyone out of anything. So that was my kind of, because it wasn't even just in my consciousness, it was just completely removed. So definitely, and of course, filmmaking transformed me. Telling stories, learning stories, playing characters, makes you understand human nature so much better, and makes you become a lot more compassionate. And I think when I was younger, I thought everything was so black and white. But the older I get and the more I do what I do and tell more stories, I realize we're all mostly in gray. Like, there are very few things that are really black and white, like birth and death, So definitely it was a transformation. It still is a transformation. I don't look at my work. There has to be an emotion, it's like a marriage. Like, before I commit to something, I have to be emotionally and somewhat spiritually invested, thinking like there's something for me to learn here.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another kind of stupid question. Do you feel like you're in the movie business? Are you in show business?
No.
So why is that? It's funny because I was like, originally when I was like preparing for this, I was like thinking of, okay, I'm speaking to this amazing director and actor, and it's amazing the work they do. It's like creating these pieces of art. But then I'm thinking about it more and more, and I'm like, you're also in show business. You're also like in sort of straight up show business too, right?
I mean, you have to, right? That's the movie business, right? To make money, you have to sort of be in it. But I wouldn't say I'm in show business. To me equals celebrity, and like, there's nothing worse to me. Yeah. Or like, I don't want to be celebrated for me. I want my work to be celebrated, if that makes sense. So this importance that is given and that's in the business is just, and there's also a lot of narcissism that I'm highly allergic to.
How do you stay away from it? How have you figured this out?
I just continue focusing on what I need to do, Like, I think having a child too, really definitely puts me in that kind of, I never knew what I did with my time. I will say this, before that, I was like spinning in circles because I wanted to exist as me, but at the same time, there were so many things that I thought I had to do that don't necessarily sit right with me.
Yeah.
So there's always a compromise, but at this age, it's like, okay, I've reached this stage and I am here, and so there must be something going right. So let's continue doing and just really put all my focus on what I want to do, rather than what people expect me to do. Because I think that's the trick with show business.
Yeah. It seems like show business is by almost by construction, like vapid, like sort of like morally and emotionally vapid.
Yeah. Because you turned into a product, right?
Yeah.
So, and I remember early on when everyone was kind of jumping and branding themselves, I just couldn't do it. Honestly, I'm so moody. I don't know what my brand is. It depends on the day, kind of thing. Yeah. And to continue to cater to an audience that you don't really necessarily know, or what are you putting out there because I believe in freedom of speech, but I don't believe in freedom of reach. Not everything you say has to be heard or shared, or it's in a world that's screaming right now. I choose silence, and I've always been kind of tarif, and so, and I feel a lot more aligned with who I am doing all of this. So it's also, now I'm reaching a stage where I can make a statement by not partaking in certain things if I don't believe in them. Because, outside of all of this, our planet is burning. Like, we're all on it. It doesn't matter what religion you are, what race you are, whatever it is, we're all on it, So I think it's enough thinking about the way I look and everything that concerns me, and begin to think a little bit more collectively.
Absolutely. Okay, there's one more film of note, and then we're going to do the quick Q&A. Then there's a couple of questions in the chat. So what's the film that is most beautifully shot?
In the Mood for Love.
When did you first see this?
When I was a senior in college, 2004. I think I fell in love. I watched the movie, I can't remember, 6 or 7 times, and it has one of the most beautiful soundtracks ever made. Shugurim Bayashi. Just go watch it. Just go watch it and like fill up your eyes,
Amazing. Okay, quick Q&A, then we're going to get to the questions of the audience. So what are you watching these days?
My son. I'm not watching anything, to be honest.
That's the best answer.
Yeah.
What's your son's name?
Faisal.
Okay. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
God, so many people. But I've always been fascinated by Shams al-Tabriz, Rumi's teacher. I would love to go and shadow him.
Yeah. That's a great call.
Yeah.
Okay. What do people most misunderstand about your work?
It's funny because, growing up in Saudi, no one had any idea what directing or producing or any of it, and it's funny when they ask you, they call you up and they're like, I want to do a video for so-and-so and I want you to do it. And I'm like, do you have a videographer? Do you have this? No. We just have like peanuts to give you right now. And so that's the misconception, is that there isn't a lot of time and money and effort that goes into it, I'd say.
Yeah. All in all, on a net basis, would you say that social media and the sort of democratization of the camera through smartphones has had a really positive influence on storytelling in Saudi, or a negative influence on storytelling in Saudi?
It's hard to say negative or positive. I think it's a bit of both. But I'm, again, at this point, it's funny because I thought about it the other day. We look at ourselves a lot more than any of our past generations.
Yeah.
So there's something that I don't know. I stopped looking at myself because I started seeing all the lines and everything as I'm growing. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to go do anything. I'm just going to stop looking in the mirror. That's the easiest way to go about it, you know? So yeah, but I think it's good. I think it's important more important than what the format is used is for people to share their stories. So I think it's good.
And then the last question is, outside of your profession, whose work inspires you? If you don't answer that one, I have a different question for you.
Outside of my profession, whose work inspires you? I'm a big yogi. So my teachers, I mean, I can name them. I don't know if you'll know them. Joan Soval, Ramdas, Sri Brahmananda, Saraswati. These people really inspire me.
Amazing. Okay, so we have a couple questions from the audience, and then I have a few more myself. So I'm going to read them. The first one is from Abdulaziz, and the question is, why don't you do more films?
Give me the money.
Bruce. You're like the character in the beginning of the film. I need more money.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next question comes from Nuha. How did Saudi change from 2002 when it comes to women, like you said earlier? From a perspective of, you mentioned that you were making this in a completely different environment. For those who are unaware or maybe don't know much, how would you describe the changes since, when you made the film?
I mean, just monumental changes, especially for women. When I made the film, women were not even allowed to drive. We needed a guardian to travel, to do pretty much anything. So we were fully dependent on men. In 2017, the ban on driving was lifted, ban on cinemas was lifted. Women no longer need their guardians to travel or to, get any kind of governmental procedures done or anything like that. So it's night and day. And now they make up a huge part of the working force. When I was growing up, most of the women around me didn't work. There were a couple, maybe teachers and doctors, but that was pretty much it.
And I would say they run the table in the creative world.
Well, they run the table just in general. I mean, I've seen my grandmother and my mom, and I'm surrounded by men, by the way. I have 4 brothers, 4 uncles on one side, 4 uncles on the other side. So, and to see like how my grandmother runs the show is, she's a master.
For sure. And so there's another question. Do you watch Saudi films? And I'm going to add to that. Do you have any suggestions for folks for films coming out of Saudi that you think are worth checking out?
I do watch Saudi films whenever I get a chance. So I watched a couple. I didn't watch a lot. I mean, obviously I was in Wadjda, but I've also seen Shahad Amin's film Arus al-Bahr, which is quite art housey, out there kind of film. So there's a couple of films. I can't remember right off the top of my head, to be honest, because and there aren't many that are actually I would recommend.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you a couple of questions. What is a piece of advice that you would give to yourself 10 years ago before starting Sanctity? So that's my first question, and then we'll have a few more.
Breathe. That was pretty much it. Like, just breathe. I felt like when I was doing the film, I was holding on to my breath.
Out of fear that you're going to screw it up?
Not just screw it up. I mean, I was doing something that wasn't done before. So it was more fear of failure. And I guess screwing it up. And I would tell myself to relax a lot more. I was very, very high strung. Was
there a risk of you being arrested?
Yeah.
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 So it's not only screwing it up, it's also like, oh, this might actually end very badly for me.
Pretty much, yeah. So I was taking a very, very big risk. I had as many safety cushions around me as I could, but at the end of the day, I had no idea what would happen.
Yeah. And I was having a conversation today with the folks over at Beirut DC, the film organization, and I was talking about how I feel like there are not that many genre films coming out of the Arab world, and that so many of the films coming out of the Arab world are about like social justice, or they're like documentaries about really heart-wrenching stories, or they're films that are specifically about war and the sort of the aftermath of war. Especially, I live in Beirut, so a lot of the stories that the films that have come out of the Lebanese tradition and Palestinian tradition are about that, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just curious, like, how can we begin to talk about all these things and diversify it from a genre perspective as well?
I think all these films are speaking about survival. So they're a symptom of something greater. So it's very hard, I think, for a filmmaker to kind of disconnect and go and do something that's completely outside of it, initially at least. You know, not because they don't want to do it or they can't do it, but also in terms of funding. Funding is so hard for our films. Like, you have to justify 1,000,001 thing. And on top of it, there's all these, you know, producers or whatever, like, just they want to look at the whole region with this Western gaze, you know, where there has to be something that is kind of out there. So I think I don't think a lot of people had the opportunity, but I'm very happy to tell you that there is a filmmaker from Palestine. His name is Basel Khalil, who did a short called Ave Maria, which is completely genre. It's hysterical. It's funny. And his feature film, Gaza Weekend, just premiered in Toronto.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
so you're going to have to help introduce us so we have him on Movie Night.
100%. And I mean, the minute it comes out, anyone who can get a hold of it, I don't know, because it just premiered, I haven't laughed so hard in a really long time. I mean, the premise already is so ridiculous. And he conceived this film in 2010. And it was about basically a virus breaks out in the whole world, and the safest place is Gaza. Because it's been so, an Israeli couple try to like sneak into Gaza, basically. And this was written in 2010, and he was actually filming during COVID, and he got shut down in the middle of filming. But it is such a good movie, and it's one of those that just pulls you out a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Well, okay, so we're going to have to definitely have him on the series. Thank you so much. I know you have a hard stop, so we're going to end a little early. Thanks so much for joining. For those of you who are interested in finding Sanctity, you can find it on Vimeo. Just search Ahd Kamel, and you will be able to find it. Also on Netflix across the region, you'll be able to find it. So thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Mikey. I'm so excited. It was so nice.
All right, everybody. This is going to show up on the podcast tomorrow, as well as up on YouTube. So feel free to share it with friends, and see you on Friday. All right, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.